to a Hope 1032 podcast.
Hello, welcome to Season 5 of Raising Teens. I'm your host, Collett Smart. I'm a psychologist, a teacher, and also a parent in the middle of raising my own teen and young adult children. I started this podcast because I know that many teens are struggling, and I wanted to create an online village of support for parents. I'm joined again this season by well-known experts on teen mental health and well-being. I have such hope for this generation of young people, so each episode is jam-packed with support so that you can get on with the job that you do best. That is, connecting with and loving your teen. Jocelyn Brewer is a Sydney-based psychologist and a teacher, and she has expertise in cyberpsychology, digital well-being, and mental health. Her work answers the question, how do we stay human in a digital age? As the founder of Digital Nutrition, she's created a positive and practical framework for addressing digital well-being and helping humans of all ages to conquer their love-hate relationship with technology. Hello, Jocelyn. Thank you for joining us on Raising Teens.
Beautiful to be here, yes.
So, Jocelyn, you and I have crossed paths, I think, for about a decade, but I don't think we've actually ever met in real life. That kind of says something about the power of technology, doesn't it?
Totally. I have lots of friends who I don't think I've quite yet physically stood in the presence of, but have really awesome conversations and connections with, and you're definitely one of those people.
Yeah. So, of course, Jocelyn, you know this, but I have been quoting your term digital nutrition in many of my parenting seminars, and I even wrote about it in my own book. Parents might be familiar with variations of the term, but can you talk about your term digital nutrition and what you mean by it?
Totally. I love to talk about this. So digital nutrition as a concept really came out of me noticing the language around our habits with technology. And we were talking a lot about digital detoxing. We were equating technology use with drug use.
Yes.
And when it came to talking about young people using drugs, I was like, this sits really badly with me. What if we actually started thinking about ways that we can nourish ourselves with technology and be much more specific rather than just using this blunt metric of screen time? What if we dug into the kinds of things that we were doing with screens, the platforms we were using, the people we were following, the information we were getting, and think about these virtual vitamins that might actually be embedded in those activities. So going really micro rather than the macro. I think parents generally really respond to this because we've done so much work on healthy eating and we understand when we sit our kids down, we look at what's on their plate. We don't give them food time. We don't say you've got 30 minutes of food time. Go for it. We say, hey, you should really eat something that's green. You know, eat the green stuff, please. Eat the, capsicum and all those different things.
And when you go to a party, you have cake and lollies and that's all good.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a time and a place, and there's sometimes foods, and there's healthy or healthful foods, and there's, all of those things. And it can be a little bit moralistic. So we won't go too far into kind of diets and diet culture, but generally speaking, when we think about technology like food, not drugs, it's a much lighter, more positive and hopeful conversation.
So you might remember that we heard from Associate Professor Wayne Warburton on internet gaming disorder. Wayne has been doing research looking at young people's tech use as a digital diet for many years. So I asked him to explain his idea on the digital food pyramid.
One of the things I think we need to be teaching in schools and teaching our kids is that a media diet should be like a food diet. The same principles apply. And those principles are, firstly, moderation, right? Not too much, not too little. I don't think it's helpful being prescriptive and saying nothing. Unless the child is under 2, then there's no known benefits, but plenty of things that can go wrong. But after the age of 2, moderate use is what we look for. And the second thing is, like the food pyramid, you want more of the good stuff and less of the not so good stuff. So the green leafy vegetables of the media world are, educational and pro-social media and the stuff that is helping your child, develop into the sort of person that they would want to be and the directions you would want them to go in. The fats and the oils and perhaps the poisons, are the things that are violent or antisocial or fake news or stuff that's mind-numbing, the sort of things that are really not helping very much. And again, we're not being prescriptive. We're just saying what you want is a lot more of the good stuff and less of the stuff that isn't being helpful, right? More of the green leafy vegetables, less of the things at the top of the pyramid. The third thing is it's got to be right at the age. And it's the same with food. If you have full cream milk and you're 2 years old with growing bones, that's perfect. If you're 90 years old and your arteries are 90% blocked, then it's probably not for you, right? And it's the same with media. You need to have some idea of what's going to be helpful at your child's age. To give you one example, if a kid is 5 years old, they don't have very good abstract thinking. They're very concrete thinkers. So they look at something. If it looks scary, it is scary. So they might, for example, look at a movie and there's this wicked witch and she looks really frightening, but the older viewers know that she's actually got a heart of gold and she's actually the good character in there. She just looks a bit scary. The 5-year-old isn't going to get that. They're not an abstract thinker. It doesn't matter what you say to them. They're going to think, no, that person is scary and they're going to be frightened of them. If you're 12, 13, 15 years old, that witch is actually the good person because your abstract thinking is kicked in and I know there are no monsters. I know this person is better than they look and they make their own decisions about that. But then because they have abstract thinking, they can also abstract themselves into situations. So they might look at a school shooting example and they go, oh my goodness, I could imagine myself. I can imagine it happening in my school. I could imagine my friends being killed, or they might see a natural disaster. I could see that happening to our house. It might happen to our parents, and that's more frightening to somebody who's older. So having a sense of what people are thinking and feeling at their age is really helpful as well.
This topic actually comes from a listener question. They said, my daughter seems to be glued to her phone and my son never gets off the Xbox. How do I know if my kids are spending too much time on technology? If you have your own question, we here at Raising Teens would love to hear from you. You can send us a message using the link in the show notes.
So I've chatted about tech contracts on the podcast before. I think most professionals now agree that there isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of for every child. I love how you talk about parents not being the tech police at home. But I'm thinking perhaps there might be someone listening who's kind of got their teenager who's snuck their phone into their rooms at night. And because they're young, they do want to keep in contact with their friends and connect. It's all about connection. But sometimes they might just be binge watching a show and they are overstepping overstepping any boundary that you might have agreed on together. So what is your advice to a parent in that position? So I think what I'm asking you is how can we help our teens to practically develop digital health or buy into tech boundaries?
Yeah. Really great and quite complex question. The first thing I would respond to that is we really want to, and this is something I got from Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm not sure where he got it, but basically it's to be curious, not furious when it comes to the conversations with young people. So if you felt like your tech boundaries have slipped and technology is creeping into crevices of people's lives that you're not okay with, we can't just get angry about that, right? I think we really need to take a step back, think about what our values are and realign with curiosity about what is it that young person is doing or watching, or who is it that they're connecting with that is so powerful they are willing to fib and do some kind of tricky stuff in order to have that need met, right? Okay. And so when we actually connect with that and we think, okay, well, who are you talking to, or what show are you watching and why are you watching that? And is the content something that we're kind of aligned to? And is that, what our family values are all about? Maybe it's something that the family could binge watch together, right? As opposed to us just saying, no, don't stop, all of those kinds of things, or getting the contract out and waving it in their face saying, yes, oh, remember you said you wouldn't do this, even though often we haven't scaffolded it and shown them how to step into those kind of healthy and good digital citizenship habits. So for me, what I do in I guess my tech agreement course is really step parents through some of those skills, step them through how to clarify their values, and then step them through how to have tough conversations about change and manage change in a way that's kind of doable for parents, because we don't want to get to the point where we make empty threats and say,
Yes.
the Wi-Fi is going off.
For a month.
Yes, all of that. And then you go, oh, bugger, how do we actually get the school reports done, or there's lots of teachers and people who need to be working on their computers at a particular time. So
Yes.
I think we have to really consider what are some of the boundaries that all of us in the family need, and then look at the different children within the family and where they're at developmentally and what their kind of predilections for online stuff is. We know, generally speaking, boys are much more into games than girls. The girls are definitely gaming, and that girls use social media a lot more, though, of course, boys are on there too, connecting with their friends. So they're quite different, I guess, issues, and there's different kind of skills that spin out from use of games or use of social media because of the risks associated with both of those.
Now, just to get back to this idea of moderation, Collett, I'm going to give you what I think is reasonable, and maybe that's helpful. So for kids under the age of 2, I don't think there's ever been a single study that I've seen that shows any benefit. Even things like Play School and Sesame Street, when you're under 2, you don't learn the alphabet, you don't really develop much educationally from it. The pro-social behaviour, you really don't look at it and go, yep, I'm going to behave the same way. Once you get to about 2 or so, your brain's a lot more developed and you start to get some benefit from shows like Play School and Sesame Street. Under 2, you don't. However, under 2, there are lots of studies suggesting that there can be problems with technology, including delayed language development, problems with attachment, and a number of other things. So my suggestion is, if your kid's under 2, really they don't need a screen. Try to keep them off it if you can, because it's not going to help them in any way, and there are potential risks. From the ages of 2 to 5, we think, maybe 45 minutes to an hour a day of good quality television like Play School or Sesame Street, but with mum and dad there, so it doesn't become a proxy for the mum and dad. It's something that's mediated by the parent. That's going to be most helpful. Once you get to school, it's a bit more difficult. The old guidelines were an hour of recreational screen media a day in primary school and 2 hours of recreational screen media a day in high school. Now, I don't know any household in Australia where they would be able to keep those limits. I think that would be very difficult in the modern environment. In the most recent Common Sense Media study, the average amount of recreational screen time for a teenager was, over 8.5 hours a day. That is correct, over 8.5 hours a day. That's an insane amount of time, more time than they spend doing any other thing, probably even sleeping. Right? It's a lot of time. There is no psychologist or psychiatrist in the world who would say, well, that is a moderate or healthy amount. So really it's up to parents to get a sense of what they think is healthy and moderate for their child. What I would suggest is that you develop what's called a family media plan. If you Google family media plan, it will take you to a website where you and your child or children can sit down and work out a plan as a family about how you're going to manage media. And you're going to work out what you think are reasonable limits yourself. For younger teenagers, you really don't want to be more than 2 or 3 hours a day. And for maybe older teenagers, more than 3 or 4 hours a day. I think once you're getting to 3 or 4 hours, there's very little wiggle room to have as much time offline as online to have this balanced life. So kids do need that face-to-face time offline, and you need to build a lifestyle that allows that to happen so that you get the best of the online world, but you also get enough time in the offline world to have that good life and good development as well.
So how do you talk with parents if a child continually steps over those boundaries? What is your advice around consequences then?
Yeah, the consequence question is a really tricky one, because increasingly, there's not the carrot and the stick approach, and we need to have a much more relational model. But ultimately it comes down to safety, psychologically and physically. It comes down to respect in words and deeds. So parents really need to come up with what their leverage points are with young people in order for them to be able to then help shape some of that behaviour. And it's not as simple as, if you break the rules, the Wi-Fi is going off. There has to be kind of a more nuanced and staged approach of how you move towards those target behaviours. Sometimes it's as simple as give them the opportunity to succeed. So if we're setting goals that are just too hard, they're too much of a stretch, kids are not actually going to engage with that. part of what happens in games, interestingly, is when you start playing a game, you're probably only failing by a little bit. You're not failing terribly. Otherwise, you'd give up and you'd never play the game. So often the way we need to stage some of these behaviour change models is so that they're only just failing, that they're not failing by a huge amount and then they give up and just often go back to the game, because that is meeting a lot of their psychological needs of connection, competence, and control.
You would have heard about the DSM-5 and the ICD-11 in the episode on internet gaming disorder. That was the episode with Brad Marshall and Associate Professor Wayne Warburton. As a quick reminder, these are classification systems used by practitioners around the world to diagnose conditions, and it's also used by researchers to categorize conditions. Let's get back to where I asked Jocelyn how to talk to our children about problematic usage in general. Would you just talk with us a little bit about how you could, or how a parent could talk with their child if they know their child is using technology in a problematic way, not just, occasional overstepping of boundaries?
There's a few different things there. So the parents that I work with, and I guess my work to some degree is a little bit similar to Brad's, and I love his Tech Diet book. It's something that I refer families to quite often. I have several copies on the shelf in my little library that go out to people. Really what I think it centres around is when aggression comes into the mix, and when that real safety and disrespect, those kind of breaches happen. And often there needs to be quite a significant change at that point in order for families to reset their habits. Again, it really depends on what parents are up for and what their capacity for change is, because they're the ones at the coalface doing that work. I'm not in the family home saying, hey, buddy, come on, remember that agreement, and doing some of that coaching and cheerleading work to get people back onto target. So really it's staging the approach based on where parents are at. And I do actually use the analogy we were talking before we hit record about sleep training babies. But it's often, I could never sleep train my kid. I'm still in her bed when she's 5 and I'm still in her bed often. It just didn't work for me, whereas some people that in my mother's group were able to do that. And so I think we have to look at the kind of problematic use of technology in a similar way. If you don't have that capacity to deal with the aggression, the tantrums, and all of that big emotion that comes out, we don't want you to try and go cold turkey and amplify that. I think we also need to have really clear expectations. If we take something away from young people, what are we putting back in its place? We can't just expect them to go and climb trees or play cricket in the backyard or ride their bikes until sunset like some sort of nostalgic 1980s movie. We really need to be clear about what are we taking away and what are we going to replace it with. In my work, what I suggest is we replace it with more digitally nutritious games. So we diversify that digital diet. So rather than playing what I call the hot chips of Minecraft, Fortnite, Roblox, which in themselves are quite diverse games anyway, so we can disrupt the gameplay within those games. It's to look at a thing called the Taming Gaming database, which a UK dad called Andy Robertson created in lockdown, and go to that database and look for a new game, look for a diverse kind of new thing on the menu, I guess, that is more pro-social, that builds more collaborative skills or different skills compared to what that young person is used to kind of grinding and honing, so that they're getting some of those skills built in a space that they feel comfortable. There's sometimes questions, I guess, too, about whether there's ADHD or autism spectrum or anxiety or other things that are causing kids to take kind of refuge and shelter in games sometimes. We want to help them build some coping skills and bring those back into IRL, in real life, so that they have more confidence and competence in that space.
And a few times I've heard you talk about when it affects their health, or we're looking at health behaviours. Can you clarify some of those just for our listener? What do you mean by when it interferes with health?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of what psychologists would talk about is like healthy coping. So are we coping in an adaptive and functional way? Is it actually helping us participate in society? So are you able to attend school on time? Are you able to actually give school your best shot, right? So it's all that kind of growth mindset of praising effort. We're not necessarily looking for brilliant outcomes, but did you turn up and stretch yourself and do your best?
Yeah.
Are you having healthy social relationships? And again, I wouldn't necessarily mean that has to be face-to-face. I would say, are the relationships that you're building in online spaces actually with people that you know?
Yes.
So it really is Tim down the road. It's not some, creep. And that the kinds of language and conversations that you're having are the kinds of conversations that you would have if your mum was listening.
Okay.
That there's not that misogynistic talk and things that sometimes happen in gaming spaces in order to kind of that chest beating kind of be cool stuff. So it's really about the quality of those relationships as opposed to where they happen.
Okay. And then things like, I'm assuming you also recommend things like getting enough sleep for your age and enough exercise.
Number one, those actually are the two foundations.
Yes.
So the way that I work is sometimes counterintuitive. People come to me for all this tech help. And what I do, the first thing that we do is really reset sleep and start to make sure that physical exercise is foundational, right?
Yeah.
So we're not planning when screen time is, right? We're actually making sure that there's sufficient sleep, sufficient exercise, attending school, completing homework or whatever is expected of you. And the time that's then left over could be screen time. If you're epic at getting all that stuff done and you have 6 hours left in the day, maybe that is screen time if it's quality screen time, right?
Beautiful.
The context there.
So it's not 6 hours of Fortnite, but it's 6 hours of other quality screen time. Beautiful.
And creating stuff, So, in Roblox and in Minecraft, kids are creating incredible things. And there's context that we can actually place in that game because they're like probably the best example of a current metaverse, but both of those games to some degree are little iterations, beta versions of this big metaverse that we keep hearing being built. There's lots of opportunities for creativity in those spaces if we know what we're doing, right? And this is where, parents don't have to be sort of a maven at technology, but they do have to take an interest and actually ask the experts in their family, which are the young people.
So you might be wondering, what is a metaverse? I chatted with Leonie Smith about this. Leonie Smith is an Australian family counsellor. Her practice, Digital Families Counselling, is a service to help families with safety and harmony on internet-connected devices.
Roblox is what they call a metaverse now, and that's what Second Life started off being, it was called a metaverse. And all that really means is it's a platform that's virtual and you can move from one space to another. And over time, what they want is this to be cross-platform on different platforms, and you'll have a set avatar and you'll move around and all that kind of stuff. It's a virtual world type of thing.
There has been a lot of controversy around Roblox because it's an example of a game where it's not moderated and people of all ages can make contact and add their own content. So I asked both my guests about Roblox as an example.
Roblox started off where the people that were playing it could make their own worlds. And it's become more and more realistic as it's gone on. It's gone from little blocky characters that look a bit like Lego to full-on 3D design in some places. The problem is it took off, went absolutely nuts and viral, and it's the fastest growing online platform in the world today and hasn't had time to catch up with the safety settings. It's propagated by kids as young as 4 years old are playing it, right through to adults. And that means it's also being abused. So there are people on there scamming other people on there picking up kids and grooming them, taking them off that platform and getting them to send sexual abuse material, meeting up with them in real life. Now, it's not something that happens all the time, but I see it in there. So when I go into Roblox and I go into one of those games that's more like a chat room, like we might have called it a chat room in the past, what I see a lot of are the players trying to pick up other players, complete strangers. And that is such a dangerous space for a child to be in. And the whole game encourages kids to make friends with new people. It's designed that way. So you'll go into one of the games in there And you'll be getting friend requests left, right and centre from people, and there's no way of blocking it, not even in the parental controls. It's largely unregulated. So there's some regulation, but people have been uploading porn into the game. It's taken off. It's a huge money-making platform without having that safety by design aspect underpinning it to make it safe for kids. And I think a lot of parents just look at it and think, oh, that's a kid's game and that's safe.
Roblox is an interesting example because it is a space. It's not a game. So what you choose to do within Roblox is kind of like when you go to a Sizzler buffet or a big buffet. You can just go straight to the ice cream, or you can go straight to some of the less delectable things, which have more risks, or you can actually eat a really nutritious meal in there. What we need to do is be clear with then what young people are doing in those spaces. So it's not a set and forget, oh, they're on Roblox, I don't need to kind of keep my eye on it. We do need to kind of have, my recommendation is, first of all, that we always observe age restrictions on games. So if you have an 8-year-old playing a 13 plus game, I would suggest that there's risks there that you need to really take extra due diligence over.
When I was speaking with Leonie, we were chatting about the fact that age restrictions on games and apps aren't always what we think they are. So while it's good to be conscious of age restrictions, we need to be more aware of the content in games and apps, because not all content is specified, and we can't always be certain about what other players will be doing.
But it's not sort of like, walk away and hope everything's dandy. It's having that game played in a common area so that you can keep an ear out for the kinds of conversations kids are having, the kinds of things that they're doing, the kinds of people that are approaching them, and keep that sort of on track and in the kind of healthy salad section, not just in the complete dessert section of that space. That's probably the best analogy using food that I can give, right? Everything comes with risks. Even face-to-face interactions come with risk. So it's not about zero risk ever. It's about mitigating that risk and really making sure that kids know what to do if they feel creeped out or that they feel like something dodgy is happening in online spaces.
Okay, thank you.
Often they don't come to us when dodgy stuff is happening, because what are they scared of? That will ban it.
We'll take it away.
Will take them away from those spaces. And that is often, for young people, as important to them as the family pet.
Yes.
Right? Would you rather have the dog or the game? And they're like, give me the game. Right? So we have to be really careful again of taking that away and what we replace it with, and how that can be disconnecting them from their friends, but also senses of competence and control.
Thank you. Beautiful. So one of the big concerns with parents, you and I have both worked as school psychologists. The biggest concern for most parents is bullying and then cyberbullying. And in my social psychology unit, I talk to my undergrads about the disinhibition effect, which essentially is, something that happens when you're pulled along by the crowd and you kind of go along with group behavior. I know that you chat about digital disinhibition, and how do you talk to teens about that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and it's very, very similar to that, for some of us in our 20s, we might have noticed that after a few drinks, we suddenly want to do karaoke when we've never thought about it before. So the digital disinhibition effect is literally the effect of not feeling like we're connecting to one another. So here we are recording this podcast, which will only be audio, but we're actually still looking at one another.
Yes. So
we're picking up a whole range of cues, and nonverbal cues in that, reminding ourselves that there's another human on the other end there. What happens for many people when they're kind of keyboard warrioring or in those online spaces where you might be sending messages, some of the anonymous apps that have been problematic in the past, is that we're not remembering that there's a person there. We're sometimes a little bit removed from the fact that this is like real life. It's not a game. It's not a script. And then we also have time to script things, right? So if I put 2 Year 9 kids in front of one another and said, okay, bully one another in the same way that you do online, they're not going to be as quick off the mark often. Yeah. They're actually not going to say those things to one another because they're like, oh, you're actually a fully embodied person, and that I know is really mean. Yeah. So I always say that eye contact kickstarts kindness. It's It's one of the first
Beautiful.
things that we look for when we're born. We're looking for eyeballs and nipples. That's the things that are going to keep us alive. So the more eye contact that we can have and the more that we can remember that there's another human on the other side of the screen, the less likely we are to have some of those really yucky aspects of, trolling, online ostracism, where, people are left out of group chats, which is, really significant for a lot of young people, and all those sorts of things that create some of the digital dramas.
Thank you. And so this leads me then to your 3 M's of digital health. Would you like to just chat a little bit about that for us?
Sure. So the 3 M's are kind of like, if you think of them as lenses that you can put over your eyeballs as you're scrolling or using social media, using technology, whatever screen takes your fancy. So they're mindful, meaningful, and moderate. So mindful in that you're really present and you have your consciousness switched on and you're making clear choices with the content that you're consuming and the time that you're spending. Meaningful in that it's aligned to your values and goals. So that might be things like unfollowing people who just really spam you, or some of the messages that don't align to the things that you care about. And you might just want to use the mute button and send them away for a little while. And then moderate in that, yes, screen time and the amount of time, we still only have 24 hours in a day. We want to limit that and be cautious of that, making sure we're getting enough sleep and doing exercise, but also we're moderating how we speak to one another and remembering that there's a human on the other side of the platform.
Fantastic. Well, I've seen quite often that you talk about doom scrolling versus hope scrolling. I know I get caught up in reading the news on my phone, and I find myself getting quite anxious about the world when that happens, and I kind of hear your voice in my head. So our teens are flooded with TikToks and social media stories. And so how do you talk to teens, or how do you frame that in terms of helping them think about hope scrolling rather than doom scrolling?
Yeah, look, I think the thing that I try and do is really remind people that we have agency over technology. We have agency whether or not we buy our kids the fanciest new thing for their birthday or Christmas or whatever it might be. We have agency over whether or not we log in. We have agency over who we follow. And we need to kind of, again, turn on that conscious consumer headspace. I was a Year 9 commerce teacher for a long time, and the first lesson there was let the buyer beware. And I think as consumers, we need to be aware of some of the information that comes our way. So we need to curate what we see. We need to notice our feelings and really tune into our feelings before we go online, while we're consuming technology and information. That's the main thing. We're consuming information. It's filling up our brains. And we ultimately have quite an old operating system in our brain that isn't necessarily good at churning through all of that information we're getting through. Little snippets of information, like in TikTok, it's like time confetti. So part of that, I guess, is just being really present to our emotions and our feelings and noticing when to stop and listening to that. Obviously, our brains up against technology is a tricky one, but the more we actually remind young people, and the first thing I do in all of my student presentations is explain a little bit about how their brain is working and about how their brain is developing, so that they can actually have a sense of agency and notice that there are small things that they can do to hack back against those big tech developers.
So good. So lastly, Jocelyn, what is your hope for teens in your work? What is your biggest hope in this area?
Look, I would just love for us to teach really proactive, relevant skills to young people so that they can remind themselves of their agency and feel that sense of hope, like they get to choose. It's not prescribed to them. I would just really love parents to be more open to these conversations and to be upskilled with more curiosity and connection themselves. In my work, I'm seeing a lot of teenagers who are really disconnected from their families. There's a sense of, of mental health of young people and a destigmatization of that, but there's still a massive gap between, I guess, parents of my ilk, kids of the 80s and teenagers of now, between we know we should talk about it, but we're still really uncomfortable about it. So just to build that connection so that we can have better conversations is really what I would love, so that young people can feel really empowered to make choices rather than feeling like all these bans and restrictions get placed on them without conversations and connection and collaboration.
Jocelyn's ideas on digital nutrition are fantastic. It just gives me such a different perspective when I catch myself scrolling through my phone, especially when I'm doing more doom scrolling rather than hope scrolling. If you would like to know more about Jocelyn's work, you can find her at jocelynbrewer.com. You can also find me or leave a question for a future episode via email or my Facebook page or via raisingteens.au. Or you can go to the Hope 1032 podcast page. Please subscribe and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'd love to see you next episode, and in the meantime, keep parenting with your teen's future adult in mind.
This episode was hosted by Collett Smart, edited and produced by Alec Green, imaging by Lucy Weil, and social media by Beth Rivers.
Hope 1032. Thanks for listening.